Today, on the panel, I'm privileged to be joined by Alan Pearce. Alan is a senior industry fellow at RMIT University and a fellow at Melbourne University's Climate and Energy College. Alan has been a tireless advocate for energy efficiency for 4 decades. Thank you, Alan, for joining us today. Next is Peter Hanke. Peter is manager in the Business Development and Transactions team at the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, ARENA, with a specific focus on supporting industry to reduce emissions. Welcome, Peter. And next we have Michael Shilley. Michael is the Group Energy and Resource Manager with Woolworths. Michael is working with engineering and technical teams towards reducing Woolworths Group carbon emission as part of their sustainability commitment. Welcome, Michael. And now, Alan, over to you. Alan?
See how this works. Yep. Okay. Is that working?
Yes.
You can hear me. Okay. Hi. Well, thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. I want to cover a few things. Firstly, some policy directions. Second, a bit of a hobby horse I have relating to consumer experience. And then look at some of the exciting developments affecting HVAC, heat pumps and refrigeration that I see emerging. So first, if we look at policy, basically we need to take a much broader approach to policy because we have to factor in an increasingly complex situation, including limiting peak energy demand, flexible demand management, managing capital and operating costs, and social and resilience impacts. And the picture there of a report from a number of social justice and health and equity groups highlights the fact that a lot of non-government organisations are becoming increasingly focused on the issue of housing, buildings, cooling and health. And this is going to be a big driver that we haven't really seen before. At a practical level, we've really got to look at a range of building regulations, rating schemes, energy pricing structures and market rules. And in practice, as people have already talked about, the National Construction Code needs to deal with a wider range of issues and also needs to focus on delivered performance, not just design intent. I think we need to expand NABERS to maybe NABERS Plus so that it rates peak demand as well as annual emissions. Our building modelling also needs to focus much more on the tensions between low peak demand and low annual energy and emissions. And our energy retail tariff structures are shockingly inefficient. We have to change them so they reward consumer action. Oops, sorry, wrong button. There. And of course, we've got to think about moving off fossil gas. Oops, and go back there one. Where are we? And dealing with the problems we face when our electricity infrastructure fails. In terms of my hobby horse, I find when I talk to people, a lot of them can't understand why, with their reverse cycle air conditioners, their heating and cooling costs are going up and their home's not as comfortable as it used to be. And I think this is where we have to recognise that a lot of equipment is deteriorating in performance over time due to things like refrigerant leakage and clogged filters and buildings deteriorating. And so I think we need to think about a more user-friendly, oops, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. We need to think about more user-friendly diagnostics that provide consumers with good feedback on what's going on and allow them to take control instead of just facing the kinds of costs and problems that they are now. Oops, never mind. In terms of future directions, I think it's a time of amazing change. And so one issue we have to think about in terms of the context that the HVAC area faces is that air leakage from buildings is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, but also an opportunity because there's an increasing need for active energy recovery ventilation, which this industry can provide. I do wonder too whether we should be looking at more factory sealed refrigeration and air conditioning equipment so that there's less risk of leakage of refrigerants. So we could use a secondary loop. Effectively, that's what my CO2 heat pump water heater does. We also need to think about, there is also a much wider range of opportunities starting to emerge from things like single pipe temperature, single type low temperature heating and cooling district systems linked to point of use heat pumps. There's also new refrigerants. I've seen carbon dioxide and hydrocarbons combined to produce less flammable, higher efficiency solutions. And of course, things like cascaded and multi-stage heat pumps, high temperature heat pumps, and optimizing efficiency and performance with all sorts of things like ejectors, overfeeding of evaporators and things like that. So I think from that point of view, that touches on a few things that we can maybe discuss a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Fantastic. Next is Peter Hanke from ARENA. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Caroline, and thanks very much for the invitation to attend and present. I'm delighted to be here to represent ARENA. I think the intent and the focus of the forum about making a cooler and more sustainable future aligns very well with ARENA's own purpose, and happy to discuss that further today. I'm just, here we go, trying to get the slides working here. There we go. So you'll notice that I've called my presentation Renewable Heating and Cooling, and I know the focus of the event is on cooling, but I very much see heating and cooling as two sides of one coin, and very much interrelated, as I'll come to in a moment. But first of all, I thought just a couple of quick words to introduce ARENA to those of you who may not know so much about us. As Caroline said, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, created by the Australian government back in 2012. And our purpose is to accelerate Australia's shift to affordable and reliable renewable energy. And we really have two overarching objectives to do that. One is to improve the competitiveness of renewable energy technologies, and the second is to increase the supply of renewable energy in Australia. And I think both of those are very closely related to the topic today. Just to finish the overview of ARENA, as I said, we were set up in about 2012. We've spent about, or invested about $1.6 billion to date across over 500 projects across a whole range of technologies. Many of those are sort of more traditional renewable energy technologies that you might think of, wind and solar and so on, but many touch on the theme that we're talking about today, and I'll come to those in just a moment. So ARENA focuses its efforts into its what we call investment priorities. We refresh those periodically as the market changes and as the needs change. Currently, our investment priorities are the three that you see on the screen there: integrating renewables into the electricity system, accelerating the hydrogen market and supporting industry to reduce emissions. And I very much see the first and third of those as being very tightly related to the HVAC and our market and industry. And I'll come into how we're supporting those in just a moment. But I guess the first point I wanted to make was this sort of two sides of the one coin issue, and many of you would be very familiar with this, I'm sure, working in the refrigeration sector. As we all know, refrigeration and air conditioning is a massive user of electricity. It's the largest sector use of electricity in Australia. It takes up about a quarter of our energy use. And it's responsible for something like 50% of maximum demand on those very hot days. So it's a really significant chunk of the electricity sector, which is why I said our first priority about integrating renewables into the electricity system is so relevant to this particular industry. How well we use refrigeration and air conditioning equipment makes a massive difference, and how well we integrate renewables into the way that refrigeration and air conditioning equipment operates makes a massive difference. Over on the right-hand side, I've taken a snapshot from a report we released late last year around process heating in industry, looking at options for renewable energy in process heating. You don't need to worry about the detail on it, but really the takeout from that is that industry, which is the big chunk of orange there on the right-hand side, accounts for about 40% of total final use in Australia, energy use in Australia. And largely that is for, or a large chunk of that is for process heating. And as many of you be well aware, the opportunities for process heating and reclaiming reject heat from refrigeration equipment is very tightly bound together in industry. So we can use heat pumps, for example, to recover reject heat from refrigeration equipment, and that flows into process heating. So both of those two sit together quite nicely. Somebody's playing with my slides. So I'd like to come back to the integration with the electricity system, and we heard reference earlier, I think Alan just mentioned about the impact on peak demand, which I agree with his comments completely. Some of you may have heard of the duck curve that's referred to, which is a phenomenon that we're getting as we see more rooftop PV coming into homes. Refers to the shape of the daily load profile, which I've got on the screen there, and sort of flattening or hollowing out in the centre. And what this reflects is a reduced demand for electricity from the grid as our homes are generating more electricity on our roofs, and you get this sort of characteristic duck-type shape. And the graph on the right is actual real-life data taken from the system operator for the South Australian grid, which is the place, as we know, in Australia where there's the greatest penetration of renewables at the moment. And essentially you can see that the belly of the duck is getting deeper year after year. Each one of those curves is 1 year's worth of data, and it's hollowing out as we get more renewables in the system. What we see though is that on that blue lines were in mild times of the day, so sort of shoulder seasons. What we see is on very hot times, very hot parts of the day, hot parts of the year, the duck takes a very different shape. It rears its head, if you like. And that causes significant problems for the electricity grid, which is some of the stuff that we hear about. And this is where I think there's a real opportunity for using the refrigeration and air conditioning sector to help address some of these problems, because we can use techniques like pre-cooling and thermal storage, for example, to address both the duck curve and the rearing of its head. So there's a real opportunity for the sector to play a role in mitigating those kinds of outcomes. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just to make the point that ARENA funds various activities in the renewable energy heating and cooling sectors, both through a roadmap for solar heating and cooling, direct support for renewable solar cooling, in this case at a hospital. And then some of you may be aware of the iHub initiative from ERA, which is all about integrating renewable energy in HVAC and very much about trying to address some of those grid impacts that I mentioned. And then finally, making the point that we do also support work in industry, looking at more that process heat side. But as I said before, it's very much looking at opportunities to where we can, where it makes sense, to integrate both heating and cooling, for example, through the use of heat pumps in this context. Great opportunity to recover heat and achieve both heating and cooling through the one piece of kit. So that's about all I wanted to do, except to say, and my slides haven't come up with the, oh, here we go, the animation. How do I make that happen? Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Except to say, so ARENA provides funding for demonstration projects that meet those investment priorities that I mentioned before. And really what we're looking for is innovative, novel projects and technologies that can demonstrate a pathway to commercialisation. They need a little bit of funding at the moment. That's what ARENA's here for. But we're here to help unlock the future investment that will come once those technologies have been demonstrated. So I'll leave it there and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Peter. Fantastic. And it's great to see that there is several projects happening in Australia using renewable and cooling solution. Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Michael Shilley from Woolworths. Michael, over to you. Michael? Sorry. Yeah. Okay, sorry, we have some technical, we're just waiting for Michael, to maybe activate the webcam, because we don't seem to see you on the screen. Okay. Okay, it looks like he's trying to reconnect, so bear with us. That's the joy of, the new online virtual conference. So he should be with us in a minute. Okay, Michael, are you here? No. I don't really know what to do. Seems he's trying. Okay, maybe what we can do, I'm going to see if there is already a question, and so maybe we can answer a question while Michael is trying to connect. So bear with me. Okay, we have one question. I'm going to put the question on the screen now so everybody can see it, and I'm going to read it out. Okay, the question is from Glenn Marsh from TAFE, New South Wales. Is the INVAC pushing manufacturers to improve domestic air conditioning system to become nearly sealed system, limiting the need for mechanical joints which are more likely to leak? Who would like to answer this question? Maybe Alan?
I'll have a go. I'm not familiar enough with the detail of the industry to know whether this is being pushed at the moment. Sorry, am I coming through okay?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, okay, good. But it seems to me that as I, among many others, have suffered issues with gradual leakage of refrigerant from split systems, and something like a 25% loss of refrigerant apparently has an impact of something like 15 to 20% on efficiency and capacity of the equipment. And if you go to 40% leakage, it doubles those impacts. This is actually a potentially serious problem over the long term, because a lot of people are going to simply not be getting what they want. And then eventually, as in my case, their machine will stop working just on a really hot or a really cold day, and they'll have to have call-outs and muck around. So I think, first of all, one option is to design smart alert systems that can warn people if things are starting to deviate from where they should. And a second alternative is to look at factory sealed systems. And factory sealed systems can have the advantage that we can use flammable refrigerants and things like that, because there are smaller quantities of refrigerant and they're kept outside. So I think there's cases for it. Where it will all go, I think, is a question for not just the industry, but the consumer market. And that's where, if more people are frustrated by declining performance of equipment and things like that, then the pressure on the industry will mount. Okay?
Good point. Thank you, Alan. So Michael is back, so with us. So Michael.
Hi there. Hopefully you can hear me this time.
Yes, we can hear you now. Let me, okay. So Michael, over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Carolyn. Apologies for that. For some reason, I seem to have had some technical difficulties. What I would like to obviously thank Carolyn for the opportunity. My name is Michael Shelley. I am part of the Woolworths team managing the energy and resources across the group. Our team is rolling out a whole variety of energy efficiency measures, as well as assisting our refrigeration field teams and engineering teams in trying to reduce our overall emissions from those activities that we do. Interesting to point out too, I guess, that Jean Blackley mentioned in his slide around food waste being a huge carbon emitter, and that's certainly something that we're Woolworths are working towards. Sorry, Carolyn, I'm not sure what the view is, because my live view is actually blank. So hopefully we're on to the second slide that I have there.
Oh, okay. Yes, because we can see you. Yes, that's all good.
Okay. So as I mentioned, Woolworths, we are very much been part of this pandemic that we've been through, and our purpose is built around we create better experiences together for a better tomorrow. And as I mentioned, you know, certainly through COVID, we have been better as an organisation. But I think certainly for today's discussion is all about how we're building a better shopping experience, and also trying to reduce, I guess, our emissions footprint for the future that we're building towards. If we go to the next slide, please, Carolyn. Just yes. For those that are on the call, I'm not sure where you're all from, but just to give some context on who Woolworths is, we are certainly Australia's largest food retailer, and we employ around about 200,000 employees, and we have roughly around about 3,000 sites, be they stores, support offices, distribution centres. And I think one of the things I quite often say to people is that from an energy perspective, we certainly have, pretty much one of everything across our portfolio, whether they be mass market sites right up to large energy consuming sites. We certainly participate in all various parts of the market. As part of our sustainability strategy, we towards 2020, we have a target of reducing our emissions by about 10% from our carbon emissions. We're currently sitting, as of last year, at 18% down. So, fingers crossed, we'll surpass the 20% when we report that later this year. As you can see there, our tracking on that third bar graph is our tracking of our carbon intensity across our portfolio. And through, I guess, a variety of measures, we've been able to reduce that year on year as we continue down that path. If we just go through to the next slide, please, Carolyn.
Yes.
So this slide talks about, I guess, cooling and heating as a proportion of our energy usage across our portfolio. Specifically, this is more relevant for our supermarket business, but that is roughly about 80% of, I guess, our energy consumption is through the supermarket business. Out of that, roughly 75% is split across 50% from refrigeration and about 25% from heating and ventilation and air conditioning across our stores. So that's about 75% of our energy consumption coming from those two assets. So you can see it's a huge opportunity for us to not only reduce our emissions and reduce our consumption and also help reduce our cost, but certainly make us much more efficient in the ways that we go in terms of providing safe carriage of food. That whole making sure that there's no food safety issues and making sure that the lifespan of food is continued as part of our stores and our processes. What we have done to certainly address that is, things like the Burwood Brickworks, which is a shopping centre with Fraser's development in Victoria. That store is part of the Living Building Challenge. And in that store, we certainly, push some of the boundaries in terms of what we do. Specifically around cooling and heating, there's those four pillars that I show there in terms of, we use natural refrigerants in that store to try and reduce our overall direct emissions. We have rolled out doors, not only you have your typical freezer doors, but also on dairy, so cheese and milk aisles, as well as meat cases. So where we traditionally have open display cabinets where we present our meat offerings, those are all covered over and have doors in front of them. And what we're seeing in that store is roughly about a 15 to 30% reduction compared to some of our market stores in and around the Melbourne precinct. Also, in keeping in line with the Living Building Challenge, we have 100% renewable energy being supplied to that store. And from an air conditioning point of view, we use the heat reclaim to help reduce not only the cost of heating that store, but also preheat a lot of the air that we do within that store. If we go to the next slide, please, Carolyn.
Yes.
So as you can see, our strategy for transition into this world, I guess, of renewable energy and natural refrigerants is built up of these sort of four pillars that we have here. The key one being the Energy Management Centre. So we have set up a team, it's probably about nearly 3 years old now, where we're monitoring, I guess, the energy efficiency within our stores, but then also making sure that we optimise how we use energy in our stores. And so quite often we'll change set points, we'll recommission stores to make them as operationally efficient as possible. But what we find is over a course of, whether it's the next day to the next month to the next year, things change in a store and then we need to continually be tweaking. So we have a team that basically monitors all of our stores and continues to benchmark that store against itself to make sure it's being as efficient as possible. And we've seen some huge reductions in energy consumption because of that. As was talked earlier with Peter around renewable energy, we have renewable energy on about 140 of our stores, have solar panels on top, and that helps to offset roughly anywhere between sort of 10 to 20% of a store's consumption. So we physically can't get enough solar on our roofs, but it helps. So it's a start towards that journey of, reducing the amount of emissions that we're using from carbon sources. Behind the meter, we also are doing things in front of the meter with the PPA, and we're certainly looking at how we can do renewable energy to supply our stores to, again, offset that huge emissions footprint that we have. And finally, it's the use of natural refrigerants, which is, quite key to this forum that we're here today. Our team of engineers and field engineers and our field teams are out there really pushing the boundaries in terms of what we're doing to support the engineering and the use of natural refrigerants within the Australian market. We've, from a base of probably about 2015, 2016, when we sort of first started toying with that idea, we've now got roughly around about 15 to 16 stores that have that, and we'll continue to grow that across our fleet. Part of the challenges is obviously trying to make sure that we replace our existing fleet of stores that have the much more harmful synthetic refrigerants. But it's a great achievement from the team, and we're certainly working towards reducing the emissions, the direct emissions that come from our natural refrigerants. And on that note, I'd just again like to thank you, and we'll hand back to Carolyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Fantastic presentation. And the Burwood, Brickworks project, part of the Living Building challenge, has attracted a lot of attention, in the media. We wrote articles about it. And I have a question for you, Michael. What did you learn from the experience? Because the challenge wasn't only about, refrigeration, but it was more about, also the facade. And so what, in terms of sustainability, did the challenge made you think more about?
Look, great point. I think the challenge was beyond, I guess, natural refrigerants, was, things like the sheathing that goes around the electrical cables, the use of PVC, whether they be for floor tiles, glues, even PVC piping for plumbing and hydraulic systems. All of that was on what was called a red list. So we had to seek, I guess, alternatives, more sustainable alternatives to that. And I guess what it highlights is, as we transition in this age that we're in, there are solutions, as was mentioned by the other speakers today. But it's probably more about enabling industry to be able to support that transition. One of our key issues at the moment is we can go and put transcritical systems in many of our stores, but we also need to ensure that we have the infrastructure, the support network behind that knows how to maintain them, knows how to operate them, and to keep that equipment going. Similarly with the Burwood Brickworks, it's the alternative methods of cladding your building, the alternatives to PVC cabling and PVC piping are there, but we just need to invest in the industries to make them much more commercial, much more cost competitive. But all of that, you need to start somewhere.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, we're going to move now to some question. We have 5 minutes, so let me have a look. There is so many questions coming in that not sure we will have time to answer all of them. But okay, let's bring a question from Jeff Robinson. Okay, let's put this one. Okay, it's a question again for you, Michael. Is Woolworths installing doors on all of their existing refrigerant cabinets?
Great question. Look, Look, I think, I guess that's a journey for us. You know, certainly as an opportunity, it definitely presents itself. I think where our focus has been, certainly for the last probably 3 to 4 years, is probably more back of house operations. So things like making sure our air conditioning is all connected centrally through to our energy management centre so that we can remotely monitor it, we can remotely diagnose problems, and we can remotely adjust problems without having to potentially send technicians or store managers to the store. Especially after hours, that really does help. There's a lot of, I guess, investment in projects that have really, really good IRRs, and that's kind of been where our focus has been. I think moving forward that we will probably transition towards that, but it's certainly a journey. You know, the Australian public is used to having no doors, I guess, on a lot of the refrigerators that we have, and I guess that's a transition that we need to make through the market.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, I'm going to push another question. There was a lot of questions for you, Michael, but there is one for Peter. And the question is from Dario Ferlin, who is part of Woolworths. So. Okay, so question for Peter. Can ARENA provide a few examples of promising initiatives which have been funded? Examples which can inspire us.
Sure.
Peter?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So I flashed through them fairly quickly in my presentation, and I might just see if I can get them up again. So some of the most recent work that we've been doing has been this process heat and cooling in manufacturing work that it's a project being run by the Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity, A2EP, which is looking at opportunities for low temperature process heating in manufacturing. But as I said before, much of it is focused around simultaneous cooling and heating, so using heat pumps mostly. And we've seen some really great opportunities come out of that. That project is just up to sort of the study phase, so we don't actually have delivered projects coming out of those as yet. But we've seen some really promising opportunities in mostly the food manufacturing sector and brewing sector, for example. There are some great opportunities for integrated heating and cooling through heat pumps. The one on the right is the glacium phase change material for thermal storage. This was a project we funded through an R&D phase to develop a phase change material, or a number of them actually, operate at different temperature points. And then we've now funded the company to go on and deploy that in a number of sites. So again, early stages, but they're in the process of engaging a number of sites to deploy that phase change material. And really the intent of that is all about optimising the use of cheap solar through the day to put it into a phase change material to give you a smooth access to renewable cooling across the 24-hour period. So there are a couple of examples. The one previously, I mentioned also the solar cooling, which is a solar thermal collection system feeding an absorption chiller at Echuca Hospital in Victoria. So a couple of examples there that where people are starting to apply these technologies.
Thank you, Peter. And we have one question for Alan. As I said, so many questions, so we will answer them in a follow-up email. But I would like, to get Alan an opportunity to answer a question. So, Alan?
Yes?
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't see the question.
Yes. Alan, so it's a question from Priya from Atelier 10. And the question is, how can we accelerate changes within building regulation?
Well, as someone who's been trying to change building regulation since the 1980s, it's much easier said than done. I think one fundamental, it's actually interesting to look at the difference between residential and commercial, where the commercial sector has been, I think, taken much more innovation and much more improvement than the residential sector. And the residential sector has a fundamental problem of a lack of a consumer voice on all of the institutions, ranging from the Building Codes Board right through to industry associations and things like that. I think we need a new institutional framework to drive it. I think also we need a lot more money invested in education and engagement with consumers to highlight to them just how different a good building is to live in. And we need to keep driving the technologies and the demonstrations as hard as we can.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Alan. That's great. Well, we're running out of time. So as I said, I apologize. We have so many questions coming, and especially for you, Michael. And so we will follow up and answer all your questions in a follow-up email. Okay. Now, thank you all, Peter, Michael, and Alan, very much for being part of this panel. It has been an incredible conversation. And thank you very much.